Hi, my name is Ted Lowe, and I've been married to Nancy Lowe since 1995, and we have 4 kids. My job has been helping marriages. I'm sitting down with people that are leading marriage experts, and I'm going to ask them, if you could only tell married couples one thing, what would it be?
It's just not a part of the conversation. Yeah. So if it's not a part of the conversation, then it doesn't become an option.
Ooh. Welcome to One Things for Married People. Hey, you guys.
Hey, man.
Oh, thanks so much for hanging out. Good to see you guys. Come in.
All right. Good to be here.
It's so cold. Today I'm sitting down with Lee and Martika Jenkins. They lead Eagles Nest Church in Roswell, Georgia. They've been married for 31 years and have 3 grown children. Lee is the president of the Lee Jenkins Group, a financial education and consulting firm. The Jenkins are speakers and authors influencing several different industries. From the NFL to the corporate world to Wall Street, they have a rich background of experiences. But the thing they do that I love the most is their commitment to helping marriages. They not only have a great heart for marriage, they have a great head for marriage. They explain God's role in marriage in such a real and practical way. Hey guys.
Hey.
Thanks for hanging out with me.
Great to be here.
Yes.
I think the thing I've loved about you guys is I've watched your ministry kind of from afar of the last few years, is the way you can take really complicated things and make them really applicable to life. I know you guys are really in the financial space. The other thing that I love hearing from you guys about is faith. And how does faith, how does that work in everyday life, specifically to marriage? Mm-hmm. Like, how does it work? Because I think when people think about faith in God and where does He fit into this whole thing, it can feel like it's up here.
Yes.
And it feels real ethereal. And I think even people here in One Flesh right now, millennials are going, are you doing surgery? Like, what are we talking about here, right? Like, what's going on? Can you talk a little bit, as you've talked to younger couples or just couples, period, when the God piece just feels like they don't know what to do with it?
Well, one of the things is you have to make sure that your spiritual life is a priority. People understand what that means.
Right.
And so even though your spiritual life may be important, well, is it 4th or 5th or 6th in right. terms of your priority? Mm-hmm. So we kind of like to talk about it in terms of priorities. Mm-hmm. And what does it mean to keep Christ first in your marriage? What does it mean to have a godly family, to be a godly parent, and a godly wife, godly husband?
What are some things that you feel like that young couples or couples in general have bought into when it comes to marriage that's just different than God's way for marriage?
Well, the number one thing is, will you have a Christian marriage or a cultural marriage? You're in love and you want to be with that person,
right.
But there's a lot of responsibility when you start talking about a Christian marriage versus a cultural marriage. So the first thing you have to be concerned about is the purpose for the marriage. You see, in a Christian marriage, it's not just for the sexual gratification or the procreation of children and companionship. All of that is great. But there's a higher purpose than that. And so the first thing we try to explain to people is that you have to understand what your purpose is. And that purpose is pretty simple. It is to be an illustration of Christ and the church. In other words, our marriages ought to look a little bit like heaven.
Oh, look at that. A little bit like heaven. So what is it? That feels like a lot of pressure to say your marriage should look like Christ and the church. Like, what does it look like? What does it feel like to couples, do you think?
Yeah.
Well, in the culture today, most couples think, okay, well, we're 2 individual people and we're going to get married and just see if it works. If it doesn't work, we're out of here.
Right.
That's just, they're very casual with it, or they decide not to get married at all. Whereas as Christians, our job is to say, well, we love each other and God is actually putting us together for a purpose. We're not just happenstance getting together. We're getting together for His purposes and for His glory, for His reasons.
The ripple effects are just crazy when you think about one marriage, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, no doubt about it. So a good question is to ask is, what is our purpose? Why did God bring us together? And so maybe that's a difference between a Christian and a cultural marriage. Most people in the culture don't really ask that question. But there is a purpose, there is a reason that God brings 2 people together. And He also has an assignment for them. And it behooves us as we grow in that relationship to try to fulfill that assignment.
Yeah, like what's the purpose? Because what do you guys think the cultural purpose? Do you think, you say, well, hey, we're going to try this thing out and see it works. What do you think, when it's our purpose, do you think when couples come in, he's got a purpose, she's got a purpose, and those purposes are typically different, right?
Yeah, well, that's normal for two people to come in with two purposes. If
Right.
everybody was the same, then we wouldn't need each other.
Yeah, exactly.
And so the beauty of a Christian marriage is the two shall become one flesh. Now that's another one of those things like,
Drop
whoa,
the flesh, keep
that's
the
right,
one.
that's spooky. And it's true, man, that's spooky. Yeah, it's really spooky, man. So, but it just means that you start to operate as one unit. It means that you are unified. And unity doesn't mean sameness.
No.
Unity means two different parts going in the same direction. Unity is oneness of purpose. So, in order to achieve success on the football field, if you're a football team, you have different positions. People are different heights. In order to listen to great music, if you're an orchestra or a band, you have different instruments. They sound different. But when you put it all together, it sounds great. It's harmony. And that's really what marriage is. It is differences kind of coming in line with the same purpose. And we call that unity. One of the number one reasons that people divorce over is irreconcilable differences, which means we just can't get along. We're too different. Where are you supposed to be different?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. And in a Christian marriage, you have to fight to understand one another and to embrace those differences. So it would really complement your marriage instead of allowing the marriage to be combative.
So purpose. What are the others?
So the first one is purpose. The second one is promise. And another word for promise is commitment. Because when we make a promise to someone, we're saying we're going to do this. And so our promise is till death do us part. Our promise is I'm going to be with you through thick and through thin. And I'm just telling you, a lot of people's promise is not a real promise. Sometimes their first thought is, you know what, I made a mistake. How can I get out of this? But no, you made a promise, you made a commitment, and so it's time to work through it. So that's what we mean when we say promise. We mean commitment, our commitment to the Lord and our commitment to one another.
So we decided before we got married, or even right when we got married, that we would, the word divorce would never be a part of our conversation. It's just not a part of the conversation. So if it's not a part of the conversation, then it doesn't become an option.
Gotta work it out.
And that's, we just have to work it out.
So, what about you guys? What's the story in your own marriage that maybe with people, at first Facebook glance wouldn't think, oh, these guys don't know trouble or don't know a time where that promise was tough?
Yeah. All right. So I look at our marriage like people look at a finely tuned professional athlete. They'll see the finished product on the court or on the field, and they'll say, wow, he's good, he's naturally talented, or she's good. But what they don't see is the work. What they don't see is the sacrifice. What they don't see is the commitment. And really what they don't see are the things that were done before they got to that level.
Even during marriage, there's going to be tests in the relationship. There's going to be things that happen. There's going to be storms. We had a huge financial storm, back in 2008, where we lost almost everything, and it's kind of like
many, right?
Right, like so many people. So lots of people split up during that time because they couldn't handle the financial pressure and all the things that were coming at them at once. Well, we had to make a decision. So how are we going to weather this storm? First thing is we're going to go to God and ask Him to help us each and every hour how we deal with this. But things are going to happen. That's just part of life. And I think married couples have to understand that the storms are coming.
Yeah.
Nobody is going to be immune to the storms. So how are you going to weather those storms ahead of time? What are you going to do? What's the first thing you're going to do when the storms come?
When you think about the analogy of that storm, and you think about going through that, I can't imagine adding the anxiety when Nancy and I hit storms that she may leave me because of this storm. I mean, there's just something that, hey, you and me together, right? The two of us together. I know that's got to be so scary for so many people that don't have that. So this whole idea of promise is a really, really big deal.
It's a big deal. It's a big deal. So, again, I believe it is Matthew chapter 7, it talks about the two houses that were built, and one was built on a rock, one was built on sand. And the one that was built on the rock withstood the storm, but the one that was built on sand was devastated when the storm came. So I don't care who you are, how compatible you are, you're going to have a storm. So what will determine whether or not your marriage can prosper during the storm is the kind of foundation you have. So have we had storms? Absolutely. But I think we've just been blessed enough to have a very good foundation.
That's great. Talk to people who didn't have that foundation. Talk to them right there, and they're going, wow, we're in the middle of a storm, and our foundation's weak.
Yeah. Well, it's never too late to rebuild a foundation, but it takes some work.
Right.
And one of the things that would happen in construction is demolition. Okay, sometimes you got to tear something down a little bit. And I don't necessarily mean tear your marriage down, but it can be, you have to start over. You have to go backwards. You have to kind of go back to some of those principles and fundamentals and start from the beginning. And a lot of people don't want to do that. But it is never too late to build a great foundation, but it does take some work. So I just want to encourage those who have gotten into this marriage 5 years later, 7 years later, 10 plus years later, and they say, "Oh my God, we're ill-equipped." And the storm, by the way, kind of exposes what kind of foundation you have. But you know what? Once it gets exposed, then that's when the good work starts.
We know what to do.
Yeah.
Martika, what would you say?
You can always start over. You can always decide, you know what, let's build a strong foundation. Where do we begin? You know, how do we do this thing and really make it work? So couples can always make a decision to do that. It's just, you're just a decision away, literally, from starting over again.
What are some of the small things? We talk about tearing down a foundation, but what are some small things that couples can do to start rebuilding the foundation?
All right, so most marital relationships start with dating, okay? Meaning getting to know that person, spontaneity, just the whole excitement surrounding that. And then, you married a couple of years and you have children. Next thing you know, the very thing that you used to do that brought a lot of excitement, you stop doing. So we tell people one of the ways to get the spark back, one of the ways to rebuild the foundation is to go back to some of the things that you were doing at the beginning of the relationship. So we call it dating and vacating, okay? Vacationing, dating. And that really just means spending quality time with one another without the children, just the two of you. And so you would be surprised how difficult that can be, especially once children get in the picture.
Yes, it's really important for couples to have time away from the kids.
Amen.
And wait a minute, when we say away from the kids, we weren't allowed to talk about them either. So.
So away from the kids, and
you can't talk about
maybe
them when you're away.
the first 5 minutes, maybe that's it.
Yeah.
And then after that, you got to talk about each other or something
Right.
else.
Yep.
Yeah, because what happens with couples is that the children, because they are so demanding and they're very time consuming, obviously. You can actually start ignoring one another and being more consumed with what they need than what you need. So Lee and I made a decision before we had children that we were still going to be the priority. Our relationship is the priority in the house, not the children.
Yeah, I love that.
Yes.
Okay, so those are two differences. What's our third one?
All right, so we talked about purpose, we talked about promise, and then the third one is prayer. Prayer. Communicating with God and doing it first and foremost individually. You have to have a relationship with God, but then secondly, praying with each other.
That's a scary thing for a lot of people, right? Especially for guys. That's vulnerable, right?
Yes.
That's
Right.
very, very vulnerable. Talk to that guy. Talk to that lady. Say, oh man, we can't even talk to each other. I can't imagine talking to God, the two of us. How does that work?
Wow. I would give one tip. If you're a little bit awkward with praying with your spouse, then just pray for them.
I love it.
Yeah. So you know what they need, or just pray for them. And so that's how, if nothing else, I can pray for my wife. Ask God to protect her and bless her and to draw her closer to Him. And then I just thank the Lord for having such a great wife. I mean, hearing my wife thank the Lord for her husband, and her hearing me thank the Lord for my wife, and to say, Lord, I thank you for giving me the best wife on the planet. Thank you.
That's powerful.
It doesn't take a lot of fancy words to pray with each other.
That's a huge thing right there. I think.
Yeah.
So if they can't pray together, you can pray for
You
them.
can pray for them.
them.
And that's a
Yeah.
great first start, right?
It is.
Because that's probably the scariest of the 4 P's.
Yeah,
All right.
it is.
And so
It
what's
is.
our 4th P?
The 4th P is positioning.
Okay.
Positioning. In other words, what are your roles? Again, back to a sports analogy. In order to be effective on a team, you have to be in the right position. There's a great quarterback named Tom Brady, and he's a great quarterback. But if you put him on the defensive line, he probably wouldn't be too great. Okay, so what are our roles in this marriage? What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? And how do we make this marriage great by playing the particular role that we feel like we need to play?
Gotcha. What about for you guys? What are different? You go, Martika, this is my strength. You go, this is my strength. You go, man, this is working.
Yeah. Well, I think you have to look at every area. For instance, when we first got married, I handled all of the finances because that was my strength. But the busier I got in business and ministry, I started to hand some of that over to her. And now she makes most of the handles most of the financial management because she has a little bit more time than me. And so I just think it's a give and take thing, depending on the season of the marriage.
Okay, so the roles
Right.
can even swap.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Martika, what about you?
Well, when the children were growing up, I was kind of the person who, my role was more emotional support, and Lee was the disciplinarian. We played off of each other that way. You know, they knew they could come to me for anything, and now, I mean, they go to him for almost everything. You know, so it's just
So the
over
roles have been
time,
shifted.
the roles can shift. I mean, and we have to be flexible with that. It's not like you're the man, so you handle the money, and I'm, or I'm the wife, I don't handle the money. It's who's the strongest.
Yeah.
Who's the strongest
Yeah.
person in that area?
Yeah. So when you look at positioning, you look at roles, you have to consider 2 things: gifting and the season of life that you're
That's
in.
good.
Right.
Yeah, you have to
That's
consider
good.
both of those things because the season of life can change, and therefore the roles can change.
If you were sitting across the table from a couple and you could only tell them one thing based on everything that you guys have just talked about, you really boil it down, what would be that one thing that you could say?
If I was going to tell couples one thing that I believe could change their life, it would be to choose him versus them.
That's good.
To choose Jesus's way versus the world's way.
It's powerful.
Yes.
In Colossians 2:8, it's basically saying, don't buy into the world's philosophies. Focus on Christ, not on these empty philosophies of the world.
I love that. So have you seen this one thing, play out in the real world?
Yes. Well, I've seen a few couples who raised their children and they ignored each other while their children were being raised. They got so involved emotionally and physically in raising their children, which any good parent would want to be a good parent. Unfortunately, they didn't pay each other the type of attention that they should have. So once they were empty nesters, then they had to face each other, and they decided that they did not like one another because they had totally ignored each other. So they had a decision to make. Are we going to separate? Are we going to divorce? Or do we believe God put us together? And so they decided that they believe God put them together, which meant that they had to rebuild the marriage, start really from scratch, getting to know one another in this new season of life. So they just decided to do it God's way and not the world's way, not the way of the culture. And they fought for their marriage. And now they're having the time of their life.
I love it. I love it because we're supposed to be super happy when those kids move out of our house, are we?
Yeah.
That's good times. I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, we
Is it
were,
great?
We love it.
You guys
we were
I was gonna say-
elated.
Yeah, we love it.
People are going, we're going to dread it. And we're like, no, we're not.
Oh, God.
Well, I think part of the reason why we love it is because we prepared for it for their entire lives.
Right.
We prepared for them to leave and be independent of us.
I love that.
And so,
It's never too late, right?
Never too
Never
late.
too
It's
late.
never too late. Guys, thank you so much for hanging out with me. I appreciate it so much. I know people are going to love this.
It's been a pleasure.
thank you.